Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 23rd of June, 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. Well, of course, today is the day for the European referendum PSYOP. And it was quite quiet, I believe, at the polling stations first thing this morning. So we're going to be interesting to see how it pans out. But we've been reassured that votes are going to be counted fairly. This is the signal that it's fair.
Mm-hmm.
And
have you got a prediction?
I'm absolutely not predicting, no. Have you got a prediction?
I still think it's going to be a win for Brexit, and
Right.
It's going to usher Boris into the job.
Okay. Well, we'll wait and see. I'm deliberately sitting on the fence at the moment for a number of reasons, but we'll see how that pans out. So the weather, always important. Not too bad here in Plymouth. We've got some blue sky and sunshine. Pretty humid over most of the country. Reports of grey sky, patchiness. So there we are. Well, before we get on the referendum, we better discuss war.
Yes, because of course the referendum, we need to remain according to the Remain campaign because that has prevented war. But of course the war agenda continues nonetheless. And this is the People's Daily, and this article is written really by senior Communist Party leaders in China. And they're quoting John Richardson, who's chief of naval operations, who had in a previous article for the Center for a New American Security said that it's absolutely not at all normal for the United States to dispatch 2 aircraft carriers to one single ocean region. And so the Chinese really taking this up. They said conveying a so-called message about security through the exhibition of military might, and furthermore describing the events as an act of deterrence, is something that the US has done far too many times. Regardless of how many times it may have gone smoothly in other parts of the world, the US has chosen the wrong opponent by selecting China for this type of game. They say that statements from high-ranking officials in the US military, as well as the aircraft carrier drills themselves, once again demonstrate that the US is definitely not a regional security safeguard, and instead precisely a troublemaker. The US aircraft carriers have arrived, that the US strategic bombers have arrived, that the US guided missile destroyers sailing with a flag representing freedom of navigation have not only approached near to Chinese islands, the Americans together with allies have conducted military drills one after the other. So the question of who is promoting the militarization of the South China Sea, who is trying to turn the South China Sea into a gunpowder bucket is of concern to them. So the language is pretty strong, and so this is absolutely coming from the Chinese establishment.
Well, I can't say I'm surprised, Mike, because these are immense forces that the Americans are putting around. As a rough approximation, one American aircraft carrier, vast force, much bigger than the Royal Air Force, being put in one area, 2 coming in here, and of course all the supporting ships, their battle groups. So this is immense military force being concentrated. So I'm not surprised they've responded. But can I just say, I was a bit surprised to understand that China was a communist country, because I believe they were going to help rebuild our power stations.
Well, they are.
Right. Okay.
No more to be said. Next is the National Post in Canada, and this is the Russian embassy writing, and this is what they're describing as a sharply worded statement. They're saying that NATO is the real existential threat facing China and Russia. They're saying, NATO is distracting from the real existential threat facing China and Russia, and that is, of course, ISIS. They say, we believe that NATO build-up on Russia's doorstep, which is reminiscent of Cold War saber-rattling, is a complete waste of money and resources, diverting them from the real existential threat of international terrorism. Given that terrorists make no distinction between Russians and Canadians, as well as reports claiming 151 nationals of Canada are on the ISIS kill list, common sense and pragmatism dictate the need to join efforts as opposed to reincarnation of Cold War containment. So this is, I suppose, in a similar vein to the Chinese article, both Russia and China really attempting to encourage the countries that are supposedly allied with the United States to grow up, maybe?
I think that's right, Mike. But isn't it interesting that we've had this backdoor policy coming out of David Cameron's government that he's going to cut British armed forces, and then the little that's left is going to be engaged in an internationalist approach to warfare. Now, what that really says to me is that Britain is going to manipulate other nation states to do its dirty work. We could say the city, but we'll say David Cameron at the moment. So Britain's armed forces are cut and cut and cut so that they can't carry out any major operations, any major warfare in Europe or anywhere else. And then what do? We drag in bit by bit more and more countries who are going to be the fall guys when there's some form of conflict kicked off.
Yeah.
Very, very cynical, deceitful foreign policy by UK. And as I've said on many occasions, if you really analyse it, David Cameron stands up and starts the warmongering, and then it's going to be American servicemen and women who take the casualties. Well, we spotted this, and we'll just throw it in because it's a really tremendous article from Gatestone Institute. We're not promoting them at all. We're simply fascinated to see, here's a nice bit of branding that they're saying, even though the Kremlin's official position is that it is observing a strict neutrality on the outcome, the reality is that there's nothing that would please Mr. Putin more than a British vote in favour of Brexit. So those nasty Russians are all behind the nasty people who are saying that we should leave the European Union. Yeah. The spin is brilliant, Mike, isn't it? I think credit where it's due. Massively good propaganda.
Absolutely. Well, just in time for the vote today, of course. And another thing which was released just in time for the vote today was the latest population statistics from the Office for National Statistics. Now, the first thing I did when I saw this was ask myself, was this a deliberate release on the day of the referendum itself? So I went back to previous years to see what dates the previous year's releases had been on. And I have to say, in the ONS's defence in this case, they've always released it on this particular Thursday in the month of June. So there's nothing, there's no conspiracy
untoward
there, unfortunately. But UK population increases by more than 500,000 to 65 million. And they're saying the number of births has decreased on last year's figure and is below the average for the period. There is an increase in the number of deaths since last year, partly attributed to flu outbreaks in early 2015. So clearly the vaccines didn't work there. And in the meantime, there's been an increase in immigration, up 53,700, and a smaller decrease in emigration, down 22,300, which has meant a net migration of about 500,000. So this is caused by a combination of more people arriving to stay in the UK and fewer people leaving on a long-term basis, the Office for National Statistics said.
Right.
But perfect timing, nonetheless.
Perfect timing. But what a lot of questions we could ask about this, because the mass migration of people, clearly a created problem by the European Union. And we're not going to forget Mr. Peter Sutherland, banker and Bilderberger, who has openly boasted that we need the migration to break down the nation state. So millions of people being cynically used.
Now, of course, when we discussed the potential result earlier, the question was who's counting the votes. And I was fascinated that the Daily Telegraph decided to push this out today. Do you think they're telling somebody something here, Brian?
Well,
just for people listening to this, it's a tweet with a graphic on it which is quoting Joseph Stalin that says the people who cast the votes decide nothing, the people who count the votes decide everything. And really, what is the Telegraph up to here?
I think this is gloating. I'm going to say I think this is a message which the Telegraph is putting out to the elites, saying relax, we're in charge, don't worry about what's going on. Whatever this is, the undertone is very, very nasty. And I find it interesting. Here we are in Britain in 2016. Did I vote this morning? I did. And as I walked into the polling station, I had absolutely no confidence whatsoever that I was taking part in any form of reliable and above board vote. And I did say that very gently to officials there who took it in good heart. But have I got any confidence that this vote is going to be accurately counted? None at all.
Well, it's amusing that the excuses are already being made because in the media, of course, the vote could be skewed because of the flooding in the southeast of England. That's one thing. And other stuff I've seen is people saying that when they went to vote, they were told that if they voted using a pen, that vote wouldn't be counted. So all kinds of rumours going around about the veracity of the vote already.
Okay, and votes are being counted in Manchester, I think. So in the middle of the Northern Powerhouse, as you said.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then yet more to do with the psychological operation that's going on at the moment. This is Michael Cockerell, who's part of the Tory establishment, David Cameron and Boris Johnson, the friends who fell out, and really the continuing narrative that David Cameron and Boris Johnson are on opposite sides of this argument, and that therefore it is a genuine argument. And of course, it isn't anything of the kind. Boris Johnson absolutely placed in that position in order to build a narrative for himself when it comes to the forthcoming Tory party leadership. It says here, David Cameron wishes he had Boris Johnson's charisma, and desperately wants Bojo on his side in the referendum campaign. As it had that happened, Thursday's vote might have been rather different. But Johnson refused to commit himself until after he called the referendum, as Cameron called the referendum in February. He says Johnson poo-poos any suggestion that the decision to stand for exit represented what one Tory MP calls a naked grab for power and the premiership. I would say that's exactly what he was doing. And this is Sir Nicholas Soames, who described himself as a great friend of Johnson and said, Boris is not an outer. He told me that, but he believes the next Tory leader will be an outer, which I don't think is necessarily true, but I believe that has contributed to Boris's demasking conversion to the Leave cause. So Nicholas Soames absolutely saying that Boris has moved over to the Leave campaign because purely for his career prospect.
Yeah, because he knows it won't make any difference anyway,
right?
Unless the public get going.
Well, so this article ends saying Johnson's extended audition has done no harm to his chances of succeeding Cameron. If it's a Leave vote, he is the standout candidate to take over. If it's a Remain vote, the fact he is prepared to back Brexit will play well with the Tory membership, who have the final vote in the leadership election. So not for the first time in his career, Johnson will collect on his each way bet, or as he puts it, my policy on cake is having it and eating it. So that, I think, is a pretty fair representation of what Boris Johnson is.
Yeah, devious.
Yes.
I think we could add a few other adjectives, but perhaps we better not on this occasion. I often use our local Plymouth paper to illustrate some points, and I think I better bring this one in because quite astonishing article. Opinion I've seen EU. I can't focus on that from here, actually.
Profligacy.
Thank you for myself, and it's shocking. And this article is really quite something because a journalist, Charmaine Evans, has actually really said it as it is. Several years ago, I was sent to Brussels for 3 weeks as a journalist. I watched the secretaries with their secretaries. I attended meetings from morning till night, and they spilled over into cafes and restaurants that were the most expensive imaginable. At the end of the day, I went to bed feeling as though the British was something on the bottom of a shoe. I was shadowing Euro MPs and sat in meetings from small offices to the large auditorium. I've never watched intelligent people patronised, screwed down and being treated in such a condescending manner so many times. I felt the British had little voice and even little respect. This article is worth reading because the lady who's written it, she is just saying it as it is. And I don't think I've read an article which sums up the attitude of the EU so nicely. So if you get the opportunity, get online, go to the Plymouth Herald and have a read of that particular article. But the other thing that was sent in to us today was this. And it is quite an astonishing video, which I'm going to encourage everybody to go onto YouTube and have a look. It's Labour's Peter Shaw, no longer with us, but he's on Project Fear. He's talking about the movement into the European Economic Community and saying that the message comes out is fear, fear, fear. How remarkable, Mike. This man is talking back in 1975 with some real passion, and we've got exactly the same fear message being used now. I took a couple of still shots from this video because at one point here is Heath in the background, just sheer arrogance exuding from this man, bored disinterest, as actually Peter Shaw really spells out why we should be very, very concerned, or in that time, why we should have been concerned. And then, of course, here's traitor Heath himself signing away Britain. And in the video, there's some excellent little clips of some of the propaganda that was being pushed around at the time. But these are the men who have given Britain away. And of course, when we see Ted Heath there, we can perhaps reflect on the information that's come forward saying that he was an abuser of children, and what a better way to blackmail somebody to carry out what the political agenda of the banks. So I've just ended on that screenshot, but I'd say for a little 4-minute video clip, it's really worth listening to, hearing what Peter Shaw has to say, and then considering it against the backdrop of the present referendum campaign. But here's another man, the hypocrite John Major, and he's quoted in the Belfast Telegraph, "Leave campaigners are the grave diggers of our prosperity and will have to answer for their lies during the referendum campaign." What a despicable man this guy is. Certainly it would be nice to have a little bit more information about some of the parties that he attended, but I'm sure that will come out in due course. And we're going to thank Patrick Nichols, who sent this through. He found this particular quote, an earlier quote from Major: "The often unspoken fear of many people, we should address it honestly and clearly and examine it, is that Europe might develop into a superstate, an overarching government with no national veto, no control over our own borders, prescriptive decisions, a single currency imposed, and the nation state retreating to a wholly subordinate role. That fear exists out there, and we should recognise the fact it exists. I, for one, would find such a Europe wholly unacceptable for this country. I do not believe that it's remotely likely, but if that were to be the future, it would not be a future that would be suitable for this country." And we have that future, Mike.
So he seems to have changed his tune a little.
Well, he's like the rest of them, a chameleon, and these are pure lies, aren't they, in order to get this European project through. So if we're at the top end of the political spectrum with John Major, we must be at the bottom with this leaflet, which has come out from the Liberals and Liberal Democrats. Thursday referendum is not about bickering politicians. Well, why do we need to stay in the European Union? Because basically we get free movement across the EU. We don't have to have visas. So I'm going to say, I'm sure this is right. I'm sure Lauren there is a lovely lady. My opinion, she's been used as the token black lady for the campaign. And we are to stay in the European Union dictatorship because we can sort of travel. Yep.
We never could before, Brian.
No, we couldn't before. No. So we turned the leaflet over. I just blacked out the address of the recipient there. But here is the laughing face of Tim Farron. And he goes on to say, "Be like Lauren and don't let the negativity of others put your future at risk."
Now, of course, this is the same Tim Farron that refuses to answer questions about the safety of children that are brought into this country from war-torn parts of the world.
Yeah, a stunning silence from Mr. Farron.
Yes. Okay, well, yesterday I got an email asking for a little bit of comment on this. So I thought we would. And this organisation, this is the Hunt for an EU Army. This is on the fullfact.org website. Now we have a bit of history with Full Fact because, of course, they attacked the work that we had done on the Leveson inquiry. And we published this article, and I suggest that everybody has a look at this article. Have a search for it on the UK column website. Now, full fact, as it says there, it's backed by some pretty serious contenders.
Yeah.
We've got the usual Esme Fairbairn. Oh yes, here we are, the Anna Freud National Centre for Children and Families. That's their chairman, Michael Samuel, is the chairman of Full Fact. And of course, Anna Freud, that was Clement Freud's aunt. So we've got to ask a few questions about that organisation, the Anna Freud National Centre for Children and Families, don't we?
It's a fascinating mix. You get into politics, and every direction you go, Mike, is brings you up against children.
Yes.
And yeah.
So anyway, they Anna Freud National Centre for Children and Families backing Full Fact, Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust, the Nuffield Foundation, the Esme Fairbairn Foundation, and of course these were the same funders that backed the Media Standards Trust, which was running the Hacked Off campaign.
Trying to get control of the press. So
this article was about Full Fact's criticism of our coverage of Leveson. But anyway, getting back to the hunt for the EU army thing, one of the things they say is that European military force is still a matter for national governments. Of course, Brian, it probably is. But then if we look at the actions of national governments, what do we find? We find strategic defence reviews coordinated across Europe, really. This is my observation. You can correct me if I'm wrong here, but it looks to me like the strategic defence reviews have been coordinated across Europe to make strategic cuts to military capability which fit with the cuts made by the other nations. So we end up with no overlap in capabilities. Is that a fair comment?
Absolutely fair, yeah.
So all military capabilities are available only when they're working together as a combined force. There's no mention in this Full Facts article of the Franco-British Defence Agreement, of course, which was announced by David Cameron without so much as by your leave by the UK Parliament. The deal was done behind closed doors, no accountability, and a similar agreement exists between the German and Dutch governments. What's interesting, perhaps, is that these agreements seem to exist outside EU structures, which also might suggest that this policy for a combined European defence force is going to be pursued whether we're in or out of the European Union.
Well, it's nearly all over, Mike, in as much as the cuts to the British Armed Forces in order to make it easier to produce this European armed force. Those cuts have already taken place. So we don't have capabilities now. We haven't got operational aircraft carriers. We haven't got maritime patrol aircraft. We haven't got sufficient troops to do the business. So everything now says if there's trouble, we've got to lean on the Europeans. But the other thing that I can add to this is that we've known that over the last few weeks, very senior retired military officers seem to almost have suddenly woken up to the reality of the imminence of an EU army. And remember, they're already talking about the EU Treasury. And it's been fascinating to see that the Leave campaign, instead of saying, well, this is absolute dynamite, the people of Britain are going to want to know that the objective is to create an EU military force, the Leave team didn't want to engage in this. And the only explanation for this, we can talk about it quite freely today because we're right up on the referendum. The only explanation to this is that the Leave campaign itself is not quite what it seems. Otherwise, why would they be shy of talking about this very emotive subject that Britain is on the precipice of losing control of its own military forces? So I think that Full Facts has been brought in here in order to try and do some damage limitation.
Right. Well, I'll just continue a little bit with this because the next point that they make is that they discuss the UK's position on an EU army, and they quote the Prime Minister. They say the Prime Minister has been clear that the UK will never be part of a European army. We have consistently said that we will oppose any measures which would undermine member states' competence for their own military forces or lead to competition and duplication with NATO, which is the cornerstone of our defence. So there's a number of points here. First of all, constitutionally, no parliament may bind a successor. So the quote is completely meaningless. If he says that the UK will never be part of a European army, he's saying something he has no right to say. The next point is that there's at least one absolute lie within that quote, and that was the lie that we will oppose any measures which would undermine member states' competence in their own military forces, because as we've already said a couple of minutes ago, they've already done that through the strategic defence reviews. So, this whole notion that we would never be part of a European army just doesn't stack up. And of course, even if the next parliament might be quite soon, because if there's going to be a leadership election with the Conservative Party, if there should be a Brexit vote, well, we might see a general election by Christmas.
I don't think so, Mike. Well, I think we're going to see a Gordon Brown Mark II.
Quite possibly.
Simply slide the new leader in place, and you don't bother to go for a vote on it. You just drift him in.
The basic point is you cannot bind your successor government. So any statement to suggest that we will never be part of anything is disingenuous at best.
I can agree with that more.
Yeah.
So dirty dealings going on behind the scenes, and of course, if Britain loses control of our own armed forces, that is really the whole European project in place, because we no longer exist as a nation state. Well, while those serious things are going on, let's come back to the hype in the media. And this one was so incredible, I've had to take a little screen video. I'm sorry it's a little bit jerky, but nevertheless, we can cover the subject. So this is the BBC News on Joe Cox's birthday. So this was yesterday, I think that's correct. Yeah. MP remembered at world events. So suddenly this lady, I'm sure she was very nice, has suddenly been elevated to a superstar. So if we see this just runs through, but you'll get some idea of the extent of the material, the mourning, the grief, the flowers. It goes on and on and on. And we'll shortly see a tweet. Oh, there it is. President Obama, who's tweeted that this wonderful lady helped him in his election campaign, and she is working for the transformation of the world and a completely new world society. So there's some very interesting background in Joe Cox there. But what is this complete nonsense from the BBC?
It's not just from the BBC. This, to my mind, Brian, is utterly cynical use of what happened to drive forward the transformation of the world.
I'll just interject there, Mike, because it says there that a message of Love Joe was put on the beach. Who put that message there? The BBC?
Who knows?
I mean, a husband looking pretty aggressive there. Love like Joe. I mean, the more it went on, the more I thought it was pretty appalling. We'll get to the end because it's worth seeing just how much the BBC put out. There we are. And we can bring this in because this has got to be cynical and orchestrated, as you said, Mike, deification of one woman in order to do what? Spin a political agenda.
Well, she was an internationalist and she was absolutely promoting the international change agenda. And since what happened last week, that promotion of the change agenda through her has continued.
With a vengeance, basically, and of course supported by Obama. So this one was also sent to us. So I presume this has come from a Labour source. I demand a world where there's no violence against women and girls. Well, this is somebody who is not in the real world, because does this lady with her colleagues think that they are going to suddenly stop all violence against women and girls? And as somebody said, what about the violence against men? That seems to have been forgotten. But we couldn't resist but bring this in because it's the Daily Mail reporting on Joe Cox's husband, who leaves the Save the Children charity under a cloud because he's accused by several women of inappropriate behaviour. There's no investigation though, Mike, so he just gently leaves one day and then the whole thing is allowed to go down. But if you read all of the media reports on this, it wasn't an allegation by one particular woman, it was an allegation by a number of ladies. So squeaky clean husband and wife team? I don't think so.
Well, here we have a press release from Syria Solidarity UK. This is not to be confused with the Syria Solidarity Movement, by the way. They're asking who is attacking the Joe Cox Fund for supporting Syria's rescue volunteers. And this, of course, is with reference to the White Helmets. And as we predicted, Brian, they have rolled out Nick Griffin because, as we know, when was it? I think it was 2 years ago, Nick Griffin went out to Syria and got involved, or at least pushed himself quite close to the Assad regime. Yes, yeah. And so this press release says the day after Joe Cox was killed, Nick Griffin, former leader of the far-right BNP, attacked the Joe Cox Fund for supporting the rescue volunteers of the Syria Civil Defence, also known as the White Helmets. Nick Griffin's attack on the Joe Cox Fund repeated a long-running smear against the Syria Civil Defence of being a part of Jabhat al-Nusra, al-Qaeda's Syrian branch, and a listed terrorist organisation. This accusation stems mainly from an incident on the 5th of May 2015 when the White Helmets were contacted and called upon to retrieve a corpse. When they arrived at the scene, they found that an execution by an armed gang was in progress. The Charter of the Syria Civil Defence lists the tasks of the organisation, which are provided for under international humanitarian law. One of these tasks is the emergency burial of the dead. It was under this task and mandate that the members of the White Helmets were operating, and there was no other organisation in the area with the mandate for cadaver collection and burial. Now, of course, this is untrue on many levels because, first of all, this is not the only accusation. Because the White Helmets, as we've made the point that we've made many times, is that they claim to be independent, they claim to be unarmed, and we've demonstrated on many occasions that they are neither of those things. And so what they've done here is they've taken this directly from a White Helmets press release regarding that one incident, but of course there are many other incidents that we've demonstrated. And in order to demonstrate this further, if you're watching this on YouTube or on the UK Column website, immediately after this program, we're going to play out the last interview that we did with Vanessa Beeley on this subject, which gives a lot more detail into why the allegations are there that the White Helmets are part of al-Nusra Front, which is al-Qaeda in Syria. Now, of course, the key point is here that, as with the Joe Cox murder itself, with the attempt to link that somehow with far-right extremism, once again, we have a press release here trying to link the White Helmets with and through Joe Cox and the fundraising with far-right, the attack on the White Helmets rather with far-right extremism. So this has to be countered, I think, and it has to be seen for what it is.
Yeah, which is a massive propaganda exercise.
Yes.
How deep does it go? Well, of course, it goes to the lowest possible level. So let's bring in local Devon MP Gary Streeter. Here he is in the paper. Plymouth MP will keep surgery details secret after Joe Cox's death. And Mr. Streeter says in this article, many politicians fear for their safety after Joe Cox was attacked. I am thinking not only about my safety, but that of my staff. Well, this is all very interesting from Mr. Streeter. I just wanted to say UK Column notes that Mr. Streeter was not interested in the safety of Syrian families when he voted to bomb Syria. The hypocrisy of these people, Mike, it's always been there, but events are now bringing this to the surface. But these people are utterly despicable.
Yeah.
Where has all the angst in the public come from? Well, of course, it's a result of the policies that Gary Streeter and his fellow Conservatives have been putting in place. And now, of course, they're worried, they're frightened, they get police protection. People in Plymouth who are suffering attacks and abuse, do they get police protection? I don't think so. Hypocrisy.
Well, let's see if we've got some more here. Now, last week we reported on the NATO defence ministers meeting, and they agreed on important measures, they said, to strengthen the alliance's defence and deterrence. NATO will deploy by rotation 4 robust multinational battalions in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. And I welcome the commitments made by many allies today to contribute. That was Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General. He also had this to say: treating cyber terrorism, cyber attacks as an operational domain would enable us to better protect our missions and operations. So here we go. Today, the government has released this news story: Defence Cyber Test launched. So this is a bespoke test designed to identify military personnel with an aptitude for cyber work. The Defence Cyber Aptitude Test, or DCAT, has been produced in collaboration with IBM. It aims to seek out armed forces personnel who have a particular skill in this area. It enhances the existing selection measures for personnel already serving who hope to get posted to a cyber unit in the future. It comprises a number of sections and tests on individuals' abilities across a range of cognitive challenges. Prior technical knowledge is not measured. It's being rolled out across UK defence for use at the early stages of technical training and service careers. So there you go. Cyber attacks, they are becoming a formal front for warfare.
Yeah, I find this very interesting, Mike, because in a very basic analysis, you say, well, the military use all of their own encrypted communications. That's always been the case. So the military are not going to be directly using this stuff in an open form. So are we then talking about cyber attacks against the internet used by a nation state? And it's an attack on industry and government layers. Is that what we're talking about?
That's exactly it. And of course, with the prevalence of Internet of Things in the next 20, 30 years, with smart cities, we're looking at attacks on infrastructure. We're looking at attacks on everything as an act of war.
Right. So we've now taken this away from GCHQ, for example, and we're now bringing it right down to the level of the military.
Yes.
And of course, anybody who speaks out against the government then is presumably now going to be right in the target of the military. Drone strike.
Autonomous drone strike?
Autonomous, probably. Well, we've mentioned policing. Let's bring in Nottingham, because the Nottingham Post here reporting that a 1970s Nottinghamshire policeman, Anthony Critchley, has just been found guilty of abusing a boy. The judge gave him 2 years for 3 offences of indecent assault, as well as 6 months for indecency, but those were to run concurrently. We just remind people, of course, that Mickey Summers or Melanie Shaw, many other youngsters, now adults, coming forward talking about abuse in the system and saying that when they went to the police at the time for help, they were turned away from the police. We're now starting to see why. But this case is particularly interesting because let's bring the judge on screen. Here she is, Rosalind Coe. She said another child, I'll give her actual comments here, but what we've got is a child and an adult life ruined. And this judge says the abuse is worth, what's he going to serve, 18 months or maybe not even that of the sentence she's given him. And she said, the child was understandably confused by what you did. It's been with him his whole life. So you have a child's life destroyed, you have an adult's life destroyed. And what does this judge do? Say, well, I think that's worth about a year or 18 months in prison. And then because you've been totally good apart from that, how does she know that?
Yeah.
How does she know that this man was not part of a paedophile ring in Nottingham feeding off? Well, the answer is she doesn't.
Maybe she does.
Well, yeah. She said he'd led an otherwise blameless life. He'd had a significant career and he was responsible for his elderly mother. Yeah. So here's the judge just saying, well, we've got to be really quite nice to this man because never mind that you've destroyed a child's life, an adult's life, this judge sticking up for him. Mm-hmm. There's something fishy about this business. Absolutely. And these judges are not fit for purpose. What else? There. given the abuse of trust in his role at the time of a policeman. Well, we have no idea of the total extent of that, and it certainly doesn't come out in the investigation of this case. Meanwhile, we have no idea at the moment where Melanie Shaw is. We think she is in Peterborough prison. We're waiting for confirmation of that. And of course, this is how the British state treats the abuse survivors, is they are harassed, threatened, intimidated by Nottinghamshire police. And then when they won't lie down and roll over, they're put back in prison.
It's looking like she's going to end up serving more time than this guy will.
Well, she already has, Mike, I think, virtually.
Yeah.
So there we are. And just to make sure we really understand what's developing in in Britain's police, we've got a Mail article here, businessman 46 suing police after he was strip searched and left naked on a cell floor when he resisted arrest. But all the charges against him have been cleared. There's some pretty harrowing pictures here. UK column is aware of ladies who have been strip searched and cavity searched whilst in police custody, not even for being picked up for a charge, but when they have gone to the police to report a major crime. And I'm going to ask this question because it's becoming of interest to me. If the police are getting so keen on strip searching, intimate physical searches of people in police custody, is this because of the sexual preferences of the police? Nobody wants to talk about this at the moment, but we've now got a gay community in the police force. How do we know that when this sort of business goes on in a cell, somebody isn't getting sexual pleasure out of it? I'll leave you with that thought.
Here is the Prison Reform Trust, and they have just published some new facts, and I just thought it would be interesting to run through a few of those before I get to the main point. So on the 17th of June 2016, according to this document, the prison population in England and Wales was 84,405. Since 1993, the prison population in England and Wales has increased by more than 41,000. That's a 92% rise. People in prison, both prisoners and staff, are less safe than they were 5 years ago. So 290 people died in prison in the 12 months to March 2016. That's the highest number on record. There were 6 homicides in prison in the 12 months to 2016. That's the highest number on record. The serious assaults in prison have more than doubled in the last 3 years. There are 2,197 serious prisoner-to-prisoner assaults and 625 serious assaults on staff in 2015. Sexual assaults have more than doubled since 2011. There were 300 recorded sexual assaults in 2015. The National Tactical Response Group, which is a specialist group assisting in safely managing and resolving serious incidents in prisons, responded to over 400 incidents in 2014-2015. Emergency services were called out more than 26,600 times to incidents in UK prisons in 2015. And there's been a 57% increase in the number of fires in prison in the last year. Now, one aspect of this that I wanted to focus on, and they wanted to focus on in particular, was the rising self-harm rates, particularly amongst IPP prisoners. What are IPPs? IPPs are indeterminate sentences for public protection. Now, these were introduced in 2005 under the Labour government. They were scrapped by Ken Clarke, who described them at the time as a stain on the justice system. But of course, they were only scrapped in the sense that prisoners going through the judicial system would then not be given an IPP. There are still thousands of people on indeterminate sentences in the British prison system. And as this report is pointing out, they are self-harming in ever-increasing numbers. And it's interesting, Brian, that when I was visiting a prisoner in Strangeways in Manchester a few years ago, he was telling me about the number of people on indeterminate sentences in Strangeways. And he was saying that the only possibility they have for release is to admit their guilt. And once they admit their guilt, they can be put on various rehabilitation programs, and then they become eligible for parole. But these people will not admit their guilt. And it struck me at the time that if you are in prison on an indeterminate sentence, there is no release date. You are going to spend every day of your life in prison until the day you die. Why would you not admit your guilt if you were guilty? Why would you not do that? I can't. There's no rational explanation for that. So the 4,000 or 5,000 people that are still in British prisons on indeterminate sentences, this is a pretty despicable situation, and it needs to be addressed.
And of course, it's all now under the control of private prison services.
Yes.
So we just ask a question against this background. We've had the Joe Cox incident. We've mentioned the prisons, what's going on with the police. Have you noticed that Theresa May seems to have disappeared? Home Secretary Theresa May, who you would have thought would have been constantly in front of cameras to talk about the safety of politicians, the safety of the nation in view of the outrageous attack on Joe Cox. She seems to have disappeared, Mike. I just wonder whether this could be to give Boris Johnson a better shot at the leadership.
Or else she's busy preparing her own leadership challenge.
That could be the case.
Yeah.
Well, there we are. Before we go, we'd just like to say a big thank you to Paul. Paul will know who he is, but thank you. And we'd also like to say thank you to those of you that have taken up subscriptions with us. If you've still not done that, please will you consider taking out a subscription with the UK column. We can only do this with your help. We would like to do more, and everything that is more involves costs. It's phone calls, it's travel, it's accommodation. So if you want us to increase what we're doing, then please consider making a donation or taking up a subscription. Well, we'll be back tomorrow. What an interesting day the 24th of June 2016 is going to be. Join us then. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.